is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culture Ford. Bird Culture Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoak and Grayson Grundhoefer.
And welcome into the Bearcast on this Tuesday, February 27th, 2024. Craig Smoak, Sikkim365.com, also 365 Sports, joined as always by Grayson Grundhoefer of Sikkim365.com and Garrett Ross behind the scenes as well. And hope you're having a good week as we have some coaching hires to talk about after a week of coaching losses. Also, basketball continues on as it winds down the regular season, so we will get into all of that. Plus, baseball already dealing with some pretty heavy attrition on their roster due to injuries very early on in the season, so it's been a rough start for Mitch Thompson and company as they begin year two under his, eyes. And we'll get into all of that as well, but hope you're having a good one, and thanks for joining us. If you're joining us live on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page. And if you're listening to us after the fact, please find a way to go and do that, as well as 365 Sports on YouTube. We would appreciate you. But Grayson, last week, a lot of coaching losses to talk about. And this week, as we will get into some good news on that front, as it appears Dave Aranda's moved pretty quickly. But how are we doing this week?
Doing good. I mean, last night I got to watch that TCU game, and we're going to talk about that. Baylor beating TCU on the road. A lot of fun there. And actually this weekend, I'm going to go to Foster Pavilion for the first time when Baylor takes on Kansas. So a lot of excitement on the basketball side of things. We'll see if they can turn this season into a successful one. But yeah, I mean, this has been a very entertaining week and a half, I would say, and for a variety of reasons, good and bad, with all of the news about this coaching shuffle. And rarely do you see this in February, but it's what it is for Baylor at this point. So lots to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. It appears that all three coaching vacancies on the staff have been filled, but it is a matter of getting them made official, as the first of those three hires was official yesterday, as the school actually put out its press release, put out the story on its website that Mason Miller is the new Baylor offensive line coach. He joins the Bears from Tarleton State, where he was most recently as the offensive coordinator, but did spend some time prior to that around. It's not as though he's coming straight over from Tarleton State, so we can dive into his background a little bit, but there are air raid connections when you're looking at what Jake Spavital does and what Mason Miller has done in the past. He is a Mike Leach guy. Going back through his resume, was it Washington State or Mississippi State that he was at?
He was at Mississippi State.
Mississippi State.
And then he was at Washington State before that.
Yes, and so he's been kind of along the road with Mike Leach in years past. Rest in peace to the late Mike Leach. But there is a tie-in there. If you're like Tarleton State, you have to kind of look past that on the resume. Although, not that there's not a lot of great coaches. That's a hotbed, Tarleton State, for college graduates that turn out to be high school and college coaches. A lot of coaches come from that area. But I know for fans, you're looking at losing a guy to Alabama and you're replacing him with a guy from Tarleton State. So it's kind of like at first going, huh. But then you look deeper and you realize, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So Mason Miller, the new Baylor offensive line coach, what are your thoughts, I guess, starting here and moving through the three vacancies turned new coaches here in Waco?
Well, I think the first place to start is how good of a fit he is with Jake Spavital. I mean, you look through his track record, he has been, associated with so many good offenses. And that's really what stands out when you kind of look through his track record. Top five offenses at 4 different stops, which just, that just tells you he's had production no matter what the roster looks like, no matter the changes that he's had to make as far as, moving to different locations, whether it's southeastern Louisiana, McMurray, Tarleton State. And then you look at kind of more recent, Nevada, Washington State, and Mississippi State were kind of those those Power 5, Mississippi State and Washington State, of course. But yeah, I mean, working under Mike Leach, he's got familiarity with this scheme, air raid, spread type. Has had a lot of success, especially protecting the quarterback. And that's really stood out to me at Washington State and Mississippi State. Did a great job at protecting the quarterbacks there, not giving up tackles for loss, not giving up sacks, have been keys. And if you go through and look at those stops, you look at PFF and you see that, they've graded out extremely well blocking for a passer. And if Daquan Finn can get that kind of protection, I think you got to feel pretty good about what they can be going into next year. And obviously, it's a huge area of concern with Baylor following last season protecting the quarterback. One area that I do think we kind of need to look at it, and it's tough to really figure out because obviously the head coach dictates a lot of the scheme that you're going to run, but the running game hasn't exactly been the focal point for his offenses there at Mississippi State and Washington State, but at Tarleton it was. So I'm very curious kind of how that changes. Obviously, this is mainly Jake Spavital's offense, but I'm curious how they kind of do just getting back to showing the ability to be really physical up front and run the football.
Yeah, if they can do that, that would be a great sign because it's been at least 2 seasons since we've seen any kind of run game that's able to put its foot down and kind of dictate things. Maybe early on 2 seasons ago before they hit the midway point, and then everything's fallen apart basically ever since then. So been a little while since they've been authoritative on the offensive side when it comes to running the ball. They've not been able to really dictate their own terms for quite a while now, so that is an area to watch. But if you're looking for them to throw the ball around and get into the real air raid and all that comes with that, then this is a hire that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, you definitely want to have a run game to switch things up, and especially with the stable of backs that you have, you don't want that going to waste. So that will be an interesting element to see how that's incorporated and see where Mason Miller's offensive line fits in as far as run blocking and establishing that goes.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, there was a lot of pushback about, Coach Cap when he got hired. A lot of people saying, oh, what's that going to look like? Is he actually a good coach? You brought that up, I think, last week, just, the Michigan State fans kind of being like, oh, he's not very good. And I think there was a lot of reaction, how's he going to do? But I will say, I think on this hire in particular, a lot of people seem very optimistic about it. And I think because there's more familiarity with him and kind of what he's done around very historical coaches, I would say. I even got a message from a current head coach at a football program, and he was telling me that this is a really good hire. And so I just think seems to be a lot more optimism about this hire from a lot of people, and I haven't seen as much negative like there was some with Coach Cap.
Yeah, the Kapilovic, his hire was not necessarily well received. Also, it wasn't panned. It was just sort of like whatever. Like people, I think, basically were just like, don't know much about him. Whatever, let's give it a chance and see what it looks like. But with this one, it seemed like maybe it's the Tarleton State tie-in or just the air raid aspect of it. But it did seem to be, I guess, a little bit more warmly received. So if that leads to better football in the long run, then thank you, Alabama. And if it doesn't, then we'll wonder if Alabama threw a little bit of a wrench in the tire before this thing could really get going the way Dave Aranda had envisioned it. But it seems like he's scrambled given the bad hand dealt last week with all of a sudden losing 3 assistant coaches. He's scrambled and made out pretty well on the other side, and this was the first of 3 hires as they, again, start to become official and are actually released by the school. This is the only one so far actually confirmed by the school, this particular hire of Mason Miller. But, it seems like it's going over pretty well. So hopefully that translates to on-the-field action. Meanwhile, they had to continue on. I mean, there's 2 more spots still left to fill when it came to this coaching staff, and spring ball now less than 3 weeks away at this point. You knew that you were also looking for an inside linebackers coach as you lost Christian Robinson to Alabama, just like you had lost Kapilovic off the offensive line. So that was that double dip to Tuscaloosa, and it appears that Jamar Chaney will be the name replacing Christian Robinson as Baylor's inside linebackers coach. And Chaney, a guy who I saw some pretty good, reaction to initially as he comes over from Western Kentucky, which is a school that they dipped into this past offseason when they grabbed Kendrick Simpkins, the safety, out of the transfer portal. So some familiarity there, and Simpkins actually had like an emoji reaction that was, I don't forget, it was eyeballs or whatever. Yeah. That was a good reaction to seeing Jamar Chaney added as reportedly the new inside linebackers coach. So there's at least one guy on the defensive side that he'll be around who's giving it a thumbs up, basically. And not going to doubt Dave Aranda's choices on defense. Not really doubting his choices at all anyways. I think he knows good coaches. It's a matter of can the whole puzzle come together, and that's what remains to be seen. But he clearly wasted little time, and I like the way that he's approached all this. But Jamar Chaney, the new inside linebackers coach, coming over from Western Kentucky.
Right. So, I mean, the complete opposite, I would say, from Mason Miller, who's got 25 years of experience. You're bringing him in because you need him to provide stability and coaching and technique to the offensive line. You're not necessarily looking around at, is Mason Miller going to be the best recruiter? That's not really what that hire was all about. It was mainly about, okay, can he get it done on the field? Can he turn this offensive line unit around? Now you look at Jamar Chaney, and it really feels like this is all about a guy who's got a strong recruiting profile, was a recruiting coordinator at Florida. So you know that there's definitely something there as far as his ability to recruit. His age, he's not old at all. Going to relate really well with the players, going to relate really well with recruits. And then he's got the ability and the upside to learn around Dave Aranda and all these other coaches as this, as an up-and-comer, a guy that you're going to try to mold and build into being a really good coach and reach his ceiling as a coach. So I really like what they did here. Baylor's got to address the linebacker position, the 2025 recruiting class, which means they have to be able to recruit at a high level. I think Chaney's going to bring that in. And then again, I think he's going to do a more than adequate job working alongside Dave Aranda with the inside linebackers as they try to get that group figured out after a really, really tough season that they had a year ago. They had to replace Christian Robinson with the guy that could recruit, and I think they did that with Jamar Chaney.
Yeah, he played in the NFL for a handful of teams, spent a little bit of time in the pros, a short stint, but got a little taste of it, and has since been bouncing around as a coach. Started off as a head coach in Florida at a high school there, West Centennial in St. Lucie. Then became the assistant director of player personnel at Florida, was there for a year, senior defensive analyst at Mississippi State for a year. Then went back to Gainesville and was a defensive analyst the last couple of years before then joining Western Kentucky a year ago, where he was the outside linebackers coach. So now he'll be moving in, but he's obviously been bouncing around a little bit in this early stage of his coaching career. But this is one that I saw received pretty good reviews from various coaches who are linked to Jamar Chaney or know of him. So his playing career, he's got a little taste of that SEC, being a Mississippi State guy. So a lot of Mississippi State crossover unintentionally here. But, Jamar Chaney, the new inside linebackers coach, has not been released officially, but I would imagine that's just simply the same process with Mason Miller, where it can break on Twitter, but they have a process in hiring to go through with, got to sign papers and got to get it all official and contract official. And so that's what takes a little bit of a delay in that news releasing. So I'd imagine we'll hear something from Baylor on Jamar Chaney here in short order. But inside linebackers, a group that, everybody can stand to improve from last year. That's for sure, no matter what position we're talking about. But on defense, you're really looking at every group there needing to take a step forward this season, because the last couple years are just not going to cut it, and it's going to be a bloodbath if that same type of defense shows up this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough to lose guys like Dylan Doyle and Terrell Bernard, and they really haven't been able to replace those guys at all, production-wise. I know Matt Jones had some flashes here and there, but he just has not been consistent, and they really need him to be consistent going into next season. They're really trying to revamp that room, bringing in Keaton Thomas, the JUCO prospect, Kylan Reed in the 2024 class, and then trying to figure out what you're going to do with all these guys who had promise coming in, but they've been given opportunities and haven't really, risen to the occasion yet. When you look at Carmelo Jones and Josh White and Tyrone Brown, you need those guys to emerge, and they definitely need a coach to provide some technique and stability there. So, again, this position is going to be heavily influenced by Dave Aranda. And so for that reason, I really think, Jamar Chaney can come in and be a good coach, but I think at the end of the day, he's got to be able to recruit this position, and I really think he's going to be able to do that.
So there is hire number 2, and then there is hire number 3 reportedly coming yesterday as Dave Aranda looking to fill out the defensive line position, replacing Dennis Johnson, who joined the Baltimore Ravens franchise as their new defensive line coach. A nice step up for him. So, again, not as though I'm not a sunshine pumper. I think everybody here understands and realizes that. But, I think, you can try to put lipstick on a pig sometimes or try to put some sun on some situations. But while I don't totally agree that it's a positive that you lost coaches to these great programs, I think that's really spinning it because you don't want to lose coaches you just hired. I mean, under any circumstances really, but you are losing them to Alabama and the Baltimore Ravens. It's not as though they're going to some measly job somewhere else. I mean, if you're going to lose guys, this was the way to lose them. The timing sucks, but if you're going to lose people, you'd much rather lose them to the Baltimore Ravens or Alabama Crimson Tide than losing them to just some inside the Big 12 type of a job or a lateral move. So I do think that has been something that is certainly on Dave Aranda's side, and he's pivoted and reacted well to all this.
Yeah, and I think it speaks more to the ability of Dave Aranda to make certain hires as opposed to it being a good thing for Baylor. You know what I mean? It does speak well that, hey, Dave Aranda got a guy that is really wanted by Alabama, especially Coach Cap, who hadn't even coached it down at Baylor, and Alabama's over there. We need to get this guy. It does speak to that, but it's definitely not a good thing. You didn't even get these guys to coach. I mean, he didn't even coach for you.
I saw a lot of and I get it. It's people trying to rationalize and find the good in it, but it's at least it's no, there's no at least you lost him. There's no good to it, but I am going to give a little bit of leeway of okay, I can kind of see where if you are going to lose them, then you lost them to Alabama and to the Baltimore Ravens. But I think he's pivoted well, and now this third hire that he's made, and actually kind of crossing back over with Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer taking 2 of his coaches, and so he takes one from Kalen DeBoer's old staff. Not quite the same thing, but reportedly, Anoki Brechterfield is the new Baylor defensive line coach, replacing Dennis Johnson. He was the defensive line coach at Washington on Kalen DeBoer's college football playoff staff, and a part of their defensive, prowess and positives and just showings last year. The Huskies very good on defense, just very good in general, obviously beating Texas and going to play for the national title in the CFP a year ago and just falling short in the championship game. But Anoki Brechterfield coming over from the Huskies to the Bears, and what do you think about this particular move?
Yeah, so, first of all, Dennis Johnson, I think, is a very good coach, and I think that is a pretty big loss for Baylor. He did some really good things. I will say last year was not his best showing, partly due to injuries, partly due to guys just not quite developing the way they needed to.
They were basically non-existent last year on the defensive line as far as making noise and making plays that you remember. It was few and far between.
Correct, but then you also look at 2021 and you're like, oh, they were really good. In 2022, they had moments as well where they were pretty good. But yes, in general, they underperformed. And I do think that, you lose a guy like that, you still got to make a really good hire. And this is a really good hire. Anoki Brechterfield is a guy who's had success at multiple stops. He coached with Dave Aranda at Wisconsin for, I believe, 1 year. Might have been 2, but I think it was 1 there in Wisconsin. He coached at Pitt with Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald actually has mentioned him quite a bit as a guy who was a big reason for his success, specifically kind of getting Aaron Donald to watch film. That's something that Aaron Donald has mentioned, and that's really interesting because I do think technically and just preparation-wise, the defense line definitely could take a big step in a good direction. And then, of course, he spent time at, 1 year at Vanderbilt, and then, of course, his time at Washington, in which I mean, they were terrible defensively, especially up front before he got there, he and Kalen DeBoer. And he comes in and just has a massive impact on the defensive line for Washington. Really, really good stuff. I think he's just technically awesome. He's recruited pretty well. I think he evaluates talent exceptionally well. But the biggest area where he's going to be just a huge impact is the development side, which is huge. I mean, look at Baylor's roster. I know we're going to get a question in the mailbag that's asking, who has he recruited? And there are some names on there for sure, NFL guys. But the biggest thing for Baylor, I mean, look at their depth chart. I mean, they got, 8 guys who are redshirt freshmen or freshmen on the roster. Or redshirt sophomores or freshmen on the current roster. They got a lot of young guys, a lot of guys that need development, a lot of guys that need to just get better and improve. And if they can do that, then they're going to be really solid along the defense line this year and for years to come. I love this hire. I think he's going to be perfect for what they need, as long as, of course, they're able to actually hire him. We'll see how that plays out. But it's kind of similar to the Coach Cap thing, where he was at San Diego State this offseason and then got poached before even coaching it down there.
Yeah, that was something to mention. Is much like Baylor's dealt with that. That's when you especially get later on in the coaching cycle, you have guys who've already taken jobs and they don't even make it to spring ball. So, 1 week you're cursing it and the next week you're celebrating the same thing. And so in the case of Anoki Brechterfield, is there any concern about a hang-up in the hiring process here, just the way you phrase that, as just some hoops to jump through still? I know it's not like official, and that's why I keep saying, until Baylor makes it official, it's reports. But is there any reason to believe there's a hang-up there?
No, not necessarily a hang-up. I think this one is just earlier than the other two and hasn't even been announced technically by anyone. I think one person said that they're closing in on or whatnot. So I do think it's going to happen, but I just also think it's pretty wise to just say, okay, this one's a little bit further. I don't think it's quite as far along as Chaney and Miller are, Miller's done, but I don't think it's quite as far along as Chaney is at this time.
All right, so Anoki Brechterfield looking like the top target for the defensive line coach, if not
the guy.
The guy. So we'll see again when the school releases that, and then it all becomes officially official. But that is what you're looking at now. Mason Miller officially announced. Anoki Brechterfield and Jamar Chaney. Chaney further along, so just kind of like trains rolling in. Mm-hmm. Their arrival times. You've got one in the station secured and locked away, another one who's rounding the corner and should be pulling in here pretty soon, and then another one that's we still haven't seen the smoke at the top of the locomotive just yet, so a little bit of a ways to go with Brechterfield, but we will see there, because that is the latest, and that's the one hire that seemingly remains kind of in limbo as far as just not all the way done to where you can close the notebook if you're Dave Aranda and put away the hiring manual for a little while and get back to football and football only here with spring coming up in about 2.5 weeks or so from now. So there you go. That's where the coaching staff sits at this point, nearly complete with names across the board. And we will see what this all looks like when the dust settles. But a lot of work in a short amount of time for Dave Aranda, and for any critiques about just in general where everything sits, I think this is one area where you can certainly applaud how quickly he's moved. And look, by really with no choice, of course, but still it's admirable how he's been able to identify, in some cases, a second round of candidates. And I'm sure in some ways the first hiring rounds helped out, especially with O-line of, hey, I've already gone through this. Who was next on my list? Okay, Mason Miller. Let's go down to him now, because Chris Kapilovich is already off to Alabama before coaching a practice. So maybe that actually helped the process in the long run. We'll have to ask Dave Aranda about that here in a couple of weeks when we get an opportunity to talk to him again. But we will have no shortage of storylines to talk to Dave Aranda about when that time comes. So there is the coaching staff news. Meanwhile, recruiting pretty quiet at the moment. I don't think really much to really write home about, but anything else notes-wise on football you'd like to pass along?
No, not a ton. I mean, we're getting close to spring ball, less than a month away there, so that's obviously an exciting time period. Recruiting-wise, you're starting to enter camp season here coming up in March, so we'll get kind of a little bit more news and notes coming up. I guess it's in 2 weeks, the Under Armour camp in Dallas. I'll be at that, and so kind of I'll have some notes from there. But outside of that, official visits are starting to get scheduled. So we'll see kind of how that takes shape. I think last week or a week ago, we talked about Keelan Abrams, the DeSoto outside linebacker, being recruited as an inside linebacker. He's going to take an official visit to Baylor in April. But he's the only one that I've kind of talked to that I've noticed is looking to schedule one for April. Everyone else, it looks like it'll be in the summer, which has been typical of Baylor to have those June official visits. So they'll probably have 2 or 3 weekends in there where they have guys on visits. But outside of that, that's pretty much it right now. Everything's kind of focused on getting ready for spring ball and still recruiting, but it's just not the same without visits.
Yes, and this summer, I don't know an exact date, but I would think there's going to be some crossover with guys and official visits and the new facilities being opened up, or that should start to kind of overlap here in the next few months. So that'll be fun as the new field house gets its final touches put on before the grand opening here in a few months. And again, don't have an exact date. That's why I'm being kind of vague, but it was always scheduled for this summer. So
needs to be done for those visits. Early June would be ideal.
Yeah, if they can pull that off. Not sure if that'll be the case or not. We'll have to talk to Mac Rhodes about that next opportunity that we get. We'll get an update there. But that's pretty much it for football. Just waiting for a couple of the staff hires to become official. And then it's hopefully quiet for a little bit, just because you are about to get into spring ball and it's not going to be quiet for about a month. So for Dave Aranda, hopefully he can have like a week of peace and quiet and then get back to the football side of things. But we'll update news and notes as necessary, and the football conversation never stops over on the message boards. So if you haven't already, if you're a Baylor fan, become a premium member over on Sikkim365.com and keep the conversation constantly going. Meanwhile, there's a lot of conversation over there right now about basketball, as you'd imagine, getting down to the final games of the Big 12 regular season. Just 3 games remaining for the Baylor men, who have been on a little bit of an up and down, I guess, week since we last talked about them. The number 15 team in the country, sliding a little bit after 2 losses last week. Lost to BYU 78-71. The top 25 Cougars, not a bad loss, tough place to play in Provo, great crowd, and they just had a little bit more in the end when it came to that matchup. So Baylor falls there. You're like, okay, it's on the road at Provo, tough place, not a big deal. That's going to happen. And then you turn around, and there was Saturday. You host the number 2 ranked Houston Cougars. Houston now the number 2 team in the country, and you've got them rolling into town for first big-time Big 12 matchup between the 2 programs, and they proceed to blow your doors off in the first half. And then Scott Drew makes some adjustments, gets his team back in the game, and they make things very interesting in the second half, pushing the game into overtime after overcoming their early deficit. And then all for naught as they fall in overtime, 82-76, as Houston pulls away and finishes off the Bears for a huge win for Kelvin Sampson and company, and a second loss on the week for the Bears. And then the third game, since we've last talked to you, they turn around and last night get back to winning, and they needed to after dropping 2 last week at TCU, a team that rolled into Foster Pavilion not that long ago and beat them in a thriller of a game. They get a measure of revenge, getting a win in Fort Worth, 62-54. More lopsided there at the end, and then they just had some boneheaded plays and some free throws, and the score got a little bit closer, I think, than it really showed. But regardless, they do still pull out the victory, and they needed to, because 3 straight losses would have been no bueno. So lost to BYU, you can stomach that one. Lost to Houston, just tough, but could have been really ugly if you had not responded in the second half the way that you did. And then finally the win over TCU, Grayson. So 1-2 since we've last joined everybody here, and that's good enough to have them at number 15 in the country, but now 20-8 overall, and 4th place in the Big 12 now at 9-6. You've got Houston at 11-3, Iowa State at 10-4. And so with 3 games remaining, I mean, Iowa State still has a chance, but the odds of Houston being caught by anybody else or over, pretty effectively over, other than Iowa State, just one game back. They do have a shot, but again, you're getting down to you're going to need Houston to lose first, and that's easier said than done. So Houston on top, Iowa State a game back at 10-4, Kansas at 9-5, and then there's Baylor at 9-6, Texas Tech at 8-6. Rounds out the top 5 right now in the Big 12. So there's the week at hand. Unpack as you wish.
Yeah, so before we talk about kind of the upcoming stuff, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. The BYU game was so disappointing. And I know a lot of people sat there and said, Houston's going to win the conference regardless of, if Baylor beats BYU. And that's fine to say that if you think Houston's the best team. But if you look through the history of the Big 12, there have been teams who have gotten a share of the Big 12 championship who weren't the best team in the conference. I mean, we've seen Kansas, their ridiculous run. They weren't the best team in the league all of those years, but they found ways to win the games that mattered and found a way to end up tied for first place. That BYU game felt like a moment where, Baylor as an elite program, go in there, beat BYU, come back home, beat Houston, and then you are in first place in the Big 12. And you can say, oh, well, Baylor's going to lose, 2 of their next 4. You can say that, but what if Baylor goes 3-1 and then they end up with a share of the Big 12 title? And it's like, whoa, how'd that happen? That stuff happened. So I was pretty disappointed in that loss to BYU because it did close the door on Baylor having any shot at getting a share of the Big 12 title. And it basically cemented Houston as, the Big 12 title winners. I mean, they're at least going to get a share of it at this point. So again, disappointed in the BYU effort because I felt like that game was there for them, and instead they showed up and decided to play no defense at all. I mean, BYU literally just shot layups or 3-pointers the whole game, and Baylor couldn't do anything about it. I mean, backdoor cuts. It just was a really, really tough game to watch, and I think you again saw the problem with Baylor defensively as far as they can't play man-to-man defense, and for that reason, they have to run that 1-3-1, and if you face a team that can shoot threes, you're going to be in trouble. And that's what happened against BYU. So again, disappointing effort. They show up against Houston, and in the first half, they play terrible. I mean, down 41-25 at halftime, it really wasn't even that close. I mean, they just got bullied, just manhandled, honestly, in that first half. Then they show up in the second half and do the complete opposite. Their defense adjusted. They took away the middle pass a lot better, didn't give up as many layups. And really, if it wasn't for, I don't even know at what point in the game it was, but Emmanuel Sharp went on this run where I think he had like 8 or 9 points within this 3-minute stretch. And that was really the only thing that saved Houston from not losing by double digits to Baylor. I mean, it really was like that in that second half where Baylor was just dominating that game. And then Sharp just had a couple moments that allowed Houston to just score enough to maintain a lead. You get late in that game, Yves Missi gets the and one and then misses the free throw. It goes to overtime, and then Missi had those 2 just really costly plays. Had a wide open dunk and threw the ball over the backboard. And then, of course, Jacoby Walter makes a really tough bank shot, but Yves Missi comes in and dunks it instead of just letting the ball go in the hoop. That also really did cost Baylor in this game. So unfortunate there. Baylor had a great opportunity to get a huge win over Houston, but I love how they bounced back against TCU this week. I mean, last night they played great. They should have won that game by 15 points like you alluded to. They shot the ball well. They played their best defensive game of the year by far. Now, again, that's against a TCU team that can't really shoot the ball, so the 1-3-1 was effective. But in general, I was happy to see that performance. Jacoby Walters playing a lot better. Jalen Bridges continues to be on fire. And really, Yves Missi had a great bounce-back game as well. I just continue to sit there and go, hey, this season is probably going to be determined by what Ray J. Dennis you get in the tournament, because the guy has moments where he is a great creator for everyone, and he has to be. He's the only one that creates really well for other players. But the problem is he just has these moments where he turns the ball over inexcusably. I mean, just throwing the ball in situations where guys are going to drop the ball or turn the ball over, throwing the ball right to the other team. It drives you crazy because you see these moments of brilliance, and then you also see these moments of frustration. But in general, a great bounce back by Baylor, and a great moment for them to kind of build on what they're trying to build towards going into the postseason.
Yeah, the defense has been a question mark a lot this year at different times, and so that was nice to see their efforts last night. Bridges, just an electric factory, especially early on, and been fun to watch these young pups in Missy and also Jacoby Walter at various points this year. But Jacoby Walter, a big part of that win last night. And, Ray J. Dennis kind of the X factor as far as maybe how far this team can go. And still a lot of debate about how good this team actually is. They're clearly not the best team in the Big 12. That's okay. That's no shame. You could be like the third best team in this league and maybe be like the fourth best team in the country for all we know right now. But how will it all work upcoming? Well, the men have 3 games remaining, and I said 3 like it's across the board, but they're actually a game ahead of everybody. So a lot of teams like Houston has 4 games remaining, for example. But that would have been huge to get that win on Saturday against Houston, but at least they made it respectable and made it a game because, man, that looked like it was going to be really bad early on, and a real disappointment for the people at Foster Pavilion, but instead it turned into quite the thriller. So they've showed that they can hang with amongst the best in the country, and it's just been a matter of, endings here and there from why they're where they are in the top quarter of the Big 12 versus competing and actually being like number 1 or number 2 and, getting into the final race here. So a couple of results cost them, put them back in the pack, but they're still sitting in a really good spot. But, man, you've got Kansas coming up next. That's on the horizon now for the men this Saturday at Foster Pavilion, a noon tip-off, so that ought to be a lot of fun. You're going to that game, I think you said. Then Texas at home 2 days later, so Foster closing out its first year with a bang. As of the 2 remaining games are Kansas and Texas, and obviously that Texas game, the last time, I think in basketball they're going to play each other. It just makes too much sense. You're too close to not play each other, and you're both good programs. It'd be stupid to not play each other when you're an hour and a half away. So I think in football it's going to be a while before we see the Bears and the Longhorns, but in basketball I just think it'd be stupid on UT's part as much as Baylor's part to not have them still playing somewhat regularly. But this is going to be, we'll get into Texas Tech because they'll close it out at the end of the year. We can talk about that more next week. But big week upcoming with the Jayhawks and the Longhorns both coming to Waco.
Yeah, so before I unpack that, I just kind of want to give everyone a frame of reference for where Baylor is at right now. There are 4 seed according to Torvik, a 3 seed according to Bracket Matrix, and then a 4 seed according to Joe Lunardi. Joe Lunardi has them playing Vermont in the first round, and then they'd play the winner of Washington State and Samford. That would be in the Detroit Regional, which is Purdue's Regional, as the 1 seed, that is. And, of course, Baylor did not have a great time in Detroit when they played there earlier this year, so I don't know if that would be the best spot to play as they got destroyed by Michigan State in Detroit earlier this season. But that's where they're at right now. Also, keep in mind the double bye is now in play in the Big 12 tournament because there's more teams. You need to be in the top 4 to get a double bye. Currently they are, but they need to finish strong in order to do that. I think a 2-1 finish would likely get them to that double bye point. So they got Kansas. That game is on Saturday. KU's 21-6, 9-5 in conference play. They play BYU tonight. I think the thing that stands out to me about Kansas, and it's pretty obvious, is their road woes. And they've lost to UCF, West Virginia, Iowa State, Kansas State, and Texas Tech all on the road. Baylor can't lose this game. I mean, that just simply put, Baylor has to find a way to not lose games at home. They've lost twice at home in Big 12 play. They should not lose again at home. And when you face a team like Kansas, who has struggled in conference play on the road, you got to find a way to get that done. KU is 15th in KenPom, 1 spot behind Baylor, 37th in offense, 10th on defense, and currently they're a 3 seed according to Torvik. So again, this is a situation where Baylor wins this game and you might be flipping with Kansas on the 3-4 line at this point in the season, or at least moving yourself up to the 3 line. I do think a win in this game moves them squarely into the 3 seed position. I think they finally make that jump again after the tough week that was, as you mentioned. And then they play Texas. Texas is 17-10, 6-8 in Big 12 play. They're 3-5 on the road. They got blown out by Kansas and Houston recently. They play Tech on the road tonight. I think they're probably going to lose that game. This feels like a Texas team that's just ready for the season to be over. I mean, I know they've won some games as well recently, but they're not very good, and they shouldn't have beaten Baylor earlier this year. They're still fighting for their tournament lives, and if they lose against Tech tonight, and if they continue to struggle, Baylor's got a chance to really put the nail in the coffin there. And I'm curious if they're able to take advantage of that. Texas, according to KenPom, is 36th in the country, 28th on offense, 53rd on defense, and an 8 seed right now, according to Torvik. So this is an opportunity, and elite programs take advantage of these opportunities. They need to go 2-0 against these two teams, set up a big matchup in Lubbock, but they need to find a way to win these games if they truly are an elite program in my eyes.
So there you go, a big final 3-game stretch in the regular season for Scott Drew and the men, but a very important win last night against TCU. They really needed that to snap the back-to-back losses and not make that a streak, so they get the job done there against the rival Frogs, and now a fun little way to close it out. Kansas coming up before the final week of regular season play, so we'll see what the Jayhawks have in store and vice versa with the Bears. But ought to be a great one at Foster Pavilion on Saturday. Meanwhile, the women hanging around, hanging in the top 25 and hanging on by the skin of their teeth, and really an incredible win over West Virginia the other night to ensure that they kind of keep hanging around right now. But for the Baylor women, it's now 3 wins in a row. They beat Texas Tech last Sunday and then turned around last week and got a win over Kansas at Foster Pavilion, 69-61. And then on Saturday, 66-65, win over West Virginia. Had a double-digit lead and had then lost that lead and found yourself down by 1 after a big West Virginia 3. The Bears then turned the ball over with less than 10 seconds left to play, and then West Virginia, J.J. Quinterly can't control the inbounds pass in the backcourt, and they have to foul, and they foul Jada Walker, who goes to the free throw line and sinks 2 free throws with less than 5 seconds left, and the Bears win.
But it was actually Jana Van Geitenbeck had to come in for Jada
Walker. Oh, that's
Walker,
right, yeah.
And so she shot the 2 free
that's
throws
right, yeah.
cold off the bench.
Yeah, Van Geiten
won the game.
Yeah, Van Geitenbeek comes off the bench, you're right, to replace Jada Walker and hits the 2 free throws with less than 5 seconds left. Thank you for the correction. And they win 66-65. So very dramatic, but much needed win to keep their streak going now, 3 games in a row. Gut check and big-time under-pressure performance for Van Geitenbeek to come off the chair and go make 2 free throws to win the game. Pretty cool there, and a great showing for just to think the team in general of just kind of relying on your teammates and eking out a win from the jaws of defeat, and that's very much what it looked like. And you got to have your head on a swivel. So they did, and they were ready, and they were able to finish it and get a 3rd win in a row, as I mentioned. So that was big. And now the Baylor women find themselves at 21-6 overall. Still have obviously some games to round out here in the Big 12 schedule. 2 games remaining for them. Cincinnati coming up later on tonight in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then they will come back to Waco on Sunday to round out the regular season schedule, taking on the Oklahoma State Cowgirls. So the Baylor women on a nice little streak right now. And, it's been a very up and down year, but it's been one where I think, they've showed a lot of fight, and they've kept themselves in a pretty competitive spot, not at the top of the standings like most people would want and prefer, but in the mix. And right now find themselves at 6th in the Big 12. Oklahoma on top, Texas right there as well, Kansas State, West Virginia, Iowa State, and you've got the Bears there locked in at the number 5 spot with Iowa State at 10-6 in the conference. So 2 games to play, 3 wins in a row, and what are your thoughts on the Baylor women?
Yeah, they were playing with fire in this game. It was 3 minutes left, and they were up by 10, and they allowed West Virginia to come back in this game. You mentioned J.J. Quinterly with the turnover. She also had 33 points in this game. She really propelled West Virginia to come back, but she had 7 turnovers, including the most costly one late in the game there. They're on a bit of a roll, right? 3 in a row. They get an opportunity to play Cincinnati, who's currently 5-11 in the Big 12, and Oklahoma State, who's 6-10 in the Big 12. they got to find a way to win these 2 games. I mean, go in the season on a 5-game winning streak, going into the Big 12 tournament, get yourself the possibility of, maybe being the 5 seed in the tournament. Right now they're the 6th seed. I think they could get up to the 5 seed if they can pass West Virginia. But yeah, I mean, if you finish 23-6 going into the Big 12 tournament, you got to be feeling pretty good about where you're at, potentially move up a seed level to get to a 4 seed. That would be great as well. So yeah, I mean, this is a nice season, I think, for Nikki Collin and company. I don't have huge expectations for them in the tournament. Maybe win a game or 2. But I think when they play a top level team, I think it's going to be really tough for them, even though they've shown they can beat those best teams. We saw it early in the season, but I don't think we've seen it as much recently. I don't think that's truly indicative of who the current team is. But very happy to see that, very happy to see them continue to fight. And that was definitely a moment winning that game on the road where you could see the celebration and the happiness that they're kind of playing with right now.
Yeah, they're playing with some joy, so to speak. But yeah, not the teams of old that you feel like are, skyrocketing towards a number 1 seed, a number 1 overall seed, or just kind of sprinting their way towards a Big 12 championship. That's a lot more questionable with this group right now, but showing a lot of fight, seeming to get along pretty well in a group that loves each other. And it was cool to see the Brittany Griner celebration a couple of weeks ago. And so there's some things to really like. I mean, they're just not, I guess the missing piece would be just as competitive nationally as you would like, or even in the Big 12 for that matter. Sitting 6th is not exactly where you want to be, but I guess it's a matter of just giving it some more time. But all you can do for right now is just get in the tournament and try to make some noise, and they're going to have the opportunity to do that both with the Big 12 and nationally. So we'll see how they close things out. But good, gritty way to finish off that game, even though you shouldn't have been in that position to begin with the large lead that you had there late. Still, it's like Kansas State winning their up-teens overtime game. Like, you shouldn't have been in overtime, but sure beats losing in overtime. That would have been a disaster. And so that's kind of how I view that West Virginia game. So very interesting finish there, and a gutsy win by the Baylor women. So.
Yeah, and currently Baylor is a 5 seed according to Joe Lenardi. They would play Drake in the first round, and then Gonzaga, the winner of Gonzaga and Stony Brook. Again, a big reason why I'm mentioning try to get to the 4 seed line is because, remember, in the women's game, if you're a top 4 seed, you get home court advantage for the first 2 rounds. So that would really be helpful to try to get to the Sweet 16, potentially.
Yes, it would. So there they sit with a couple of games to go, and we will be continuing to follow along with them as they close it on out here in these final 2. So there are all of the catch-ups, I guess, and I suppose there is one more. I don't know how much we'll dabble in this because I don't know how much there's going to be to talk about, quite frankly, but Baylor baseball struggling mightily. Just had what I believe is their 3rd season-ending injury already. Yep. Is that correct? In like the first 2 weeks of play, I don't even know how that's possible. But they have already been hit with a rash of injuries. And Hunter Simmons, the latest for Baylor baseball, the senior outfielder, season-ending leg injury announced just yesterday. So, like I said, I think that's the 3rd season-ending injury that they've had up to this point from this team and its first couple of weeks on the diamond. And so that's just a tough pill to swallow, and it doesn't help that you're also losing games as well. So it's a double bitter pill to swallow. Now 1-6 on the year are Mitch Thompson and the Bears. They had the opening weekend, which did not go very well. The 0-3 showing up at Globe Life Field, home of the World Series champion Texas Rangers. The reigning World Series champion Texas Rangers, but 0-3 at the Shriners Classic. You at least see, okay, Oregon, Nebraska, Tennessee, those are all really good teams. They turned around last Tuesday and got their first win against Lamar, but then last weekend, hosting number 22 Indiana, 8-4 loss, 6-1 loss, and then lost in 8 innings, run ruled 15-5. So they will be back at it at Baylor Ballpark on Wednesday at 4 p.m. against Abilene Christian in a little midweek tilt before hosting Oral Roberts back at Baylor Ballpark. But, man, what a tough start to the season. 1-6, and 3 season-ending injuries by my count, with Hunter Simmons being the latest.
Yeah, it's not great right now. I mean, 1-6, like you mentioned, they just lost 15-5 to Indiana on Sunday and really got kind of destroyed by them in all 3 games, to be honest with you. Now you get a chance against Abilene Christian. You get a 3-game series against Oral Roberts, who I believe is 4-3 on the season. They're not great. This is an opportunity to win some games coming up. These next 4, and then Dallas Baptist on March 5th before you start up Big 12 play. So, again, a good opportunity here to try to create at least a little momentum going into Big 12 play, because so far this year it has been there's not much momentum to speak of, and honestly it just feels like this team is going to have a repeat of what happened last year at this point.
Yeah, it's hard to see how it's going to get much worse when you start off at 1-6 and you've lost. And I say 3, they might even have 4 season-ending injuries. I know there's been a handful of them.
Yeah.
Just injuries in general. Let Levi Caraway really break that down over on the website as far as the baseball specifics go. I'll admit I'm not up on each little detail, but man, that's rough. And so, yeah, there's a lot of time left, but you've got a pretty big hole developing already here early on. So tough to see that, and we'll see, I guess, nothing to do but sit back and just watch and take in what happens here over the next couple of months. But, yeah, not ideal whatsoever. Meanwhile, softball off to an 8-3 start, so they're still managing along pretty well, and I know big expectations rolling into this season. They were able to get some nice wins out at the Mary Nutter Classic, go 5-0 out at the Mary Nutter Classic last week, had wins over Oregon, Notre Dame, UC Riverside, UCLA, and Missouri. 3 of those were top 25 wins, so a pretty impressive showing there for the softball program. And they will host Morgan State in a Saturday doubleheader and then play them again on Sunday. So if you're looking for some softball out at Getterman, Morgan State in town for 3 coming up this weekend. So there is that as well. All right, on to the mailbag and into some of your questions to close it out as we typically do each week. Scotty B., the Baylor King, have you seen a crazier finish in a basketball game like Baylor women's basketball ending against West Virginia on Saturday? The sequence was Jada getting a steal at the end and a foul on the shot while Jada got hurt. Then Nikki Collin decided to get Jana Van Geitenbeek in to shoot free throws and made both, and a stop on defense to win the win. Yes, they did, and yes, we touched on that obviously, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure I've seen crazier finishes, but that was a pretty crazy one to your point, Scotty, and was nearly a really ugly loss, but instead a thrilling victory, and they needed that. That would have been tough otherwise. So yeah, very crazy though. You don't see that kind of a sequence very often. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean the Reggie Miller 9 points in 8 seconds or whatever it was. Same with T-Mac against the Spurs. I mean the 14 finals, Ray Allen shot. I mean there's been some crazier finishes, but that one was pretty special when in regards to Baylor. Also, don't forget West Virginia had a great look to win the game too. Mm-hmm. I mean just in 4 seconds for them to get that kind of look was pretty crazy. But yeah, I mean, again, a huge win for the women's basketball program. And again, they were very excited about it, and something that was really cool to see, because you kind of get nervous when you're having such a tumultuous up and down season, especially after the start they had, about just kind of where they're at mentally. But I think they're pretty positive still at this point in the year.
Yeah, I mean, the energy and the attitude seems to be good. It's, again, it's just, it's a little bit of adjustment. I know it's been a couple years since things changed, but it's just a different spot that you're in. And I'm still just kind of readjusting my expectations from what they typically used to be. And I know that doesn't sit well with some and never will, but there's still a lot to like about this team, even if they're not as dominant as they were once upon a time. The goal is that you hopefully get back to that point. You got to start somewhere. And again, I'm not going to dwell too much on what could have happened. We can deal with that when you come across that again. If they bow out in the round of 32 or something, you look back on the season, you say where it could have gotten better, things like that. But for right now, you pull out a win like that, no matter how you got it done, I'm going to celebrate 3 wins in a row. So that was good. But yeah, quite a crazy finish there. BU grad 21, in regards to a post Ashley put up this weekend, what are your thoughts on Scott Drew and company possibly moving away from the one and done model? I think we have had a ton of talent, but a lack of vets has really hurt us. these last two seasons, and they just played one of the more veteran-laden teams in TCU last night, right? I mean, they've got a pretty old roster.
10 seniors.
10 seniors, yeah. It was what the number that I saw last night, which is just crazy. But we have seen since the national championship, Scott Drew's been putting guys in the NBA draft. They've had a nice little run of lottery picks. Going to continue that again this year, most likely. But, would you trade that for what got them their title? And that was a senior-laden, veteran-laden, transfer-laden team. Unique circumstances. Is that a once-in-a-lifetime type of a run? Can you really replicate that? Is that the right formula? I mean, that's obviously what everybody's wondering, is if that's the better way for Baylor to win big in the long run. What are your thoughts on the one-and-done model and kind of how they've managed and worked all of that here recently and what they should do moving forward?
I mean, to me, I think they actually still have the formula correct. And I know that's going to come across weird to some people, but I mean, like the 2022 season with Jeremy Sohan, like the guy was not even a top 40 recruit and he ends up going top 10, but you couldn't control that, right? You didn't foresee that he was for sure going to be a lottery pick after that year. Because imagine if he's on the team in the next year. I mean, imagine how good they would have been. And so you can't control certain things. I think this year's team really, to me, it's all about the fact that they completely missed on D'Antoine Grimes, completely missed on Caleb Lohner, and Josh O hasn't developed the way that you hoped. To me, that's what this season comes down to, because if those three guys were really capable of being huge, impactful players, you wouldn't have to play Miro Little as a true freshman, even though he's been fine, but you wouldn't have to play him. And then in moments where, Langston Love is injured, you have quality backups and quality depth, because right now, you have Langston Love when healthy coming off the bench. You feel great about that. But aside from him, you don't feel good about anyone else really carrying a huge workload. And I think a lot of that is because just misses from the transfer portal and guys not quite developing the way they hoped. But in general, I think the formula is still pretty successful for what they have. I mean, they have two guys who are seniors out there. You got Jaden Nunn, who's been in college for 3 years. You got Langston Love, who's been in college for 3 or 4 years. Like, you do have the veterans mixed in with some of the young guys, and I still think that's formula for success as long as the guys who aren't your high-end recruits are developing the way you need them to.
Yeah, I think they captured lightning in a bottle, and that's not necessarily something you can just replicate every year. Just like, let's have a bunch of guys who are old and mature and have played a ton. I mean, you can try to do that as best you can, but I don't think that makes a significant difference for Baylor in particular versus going and landing top blue chip type of guys.
And remember, Davion and Maceo sat out a whole year before even playing. Like, they were with the program for 2 years before they played on
that's
that
what I mean. You can't really replicate that type of situation. That was a very unique to that year, and as much as they meticulously planned it, like, it's not a thing that you can just do over and over and over again. So I think it's fine. I do think it's valid though if people want to wonder about that, like how much are you going all in on like Keontae George and how much versus like, I don't know, maybe a more balanced roster or I guess maybe just there's
more veteran heavy,
rather than a one and done. I mean, I totally understand that argument. And you know what? If they go bow out in the round of 32 again this year, then I'm sure that will only be a conversation that grows. But then we'll also be celebrating when Jacoby Walters like a lottery pick this summer.
And Eves,
and Eves Missy, So they're can't have it every way, just the way you like it, but there's some good and bad to both sides of it.
The best teams have a mixture. Like, you want to have a superstar freshman who comes in, makes a huge impact, and then you have another lottery pick to kind of point to. But then you also do want to get impactful transfers. And this year, their impactful transfers, Ray J. Dennis has been good. Has he been the best point guard in the Big 12? No. You look at, Jaden Nunn has finally started to play up to his potential, but started slow. And then Jalen Bridges was kind of the guy who, yes, he returned from the team, but he was also your other kind of quote-unquote transfer pickup, if you know what I mean, to keep you veteran heavy.
So a really, really nice win for the Bears over TCU. Needed that in a major way. And this young team's like getting its bearings about it, and you hope that they're starting to hit the right stride at the right time. But last night, very encouraging for the men in their win over TCU. But this week will be huge, obviously, with what's upcoming on Saturday. Doc Crowell, Got like a couple questions. We'll just pair together here. BU Bear in Arkansas. Opinions on Big 12 basketball refs, please. And then Scotty B. I wonder if the refs didn't appreciate being called out by Mack Rhodes after the Iowa State game. If that's the case, then sorry, but you need to be called out, especially if you're doing an awful job, because the Big 12 deserves better officiating. So thoughts on Big 12 refereeing?
Yeah, I don't think it's specific to Baylor. I've watched a lot of Big 12 games, and the officiating is
college basketball.
Yeah, you're right. College basketball in general. It's just inconsistent. I mean, that's just what it is. It's inconsistent refereeing, and a lot of people want to point to one moment in particular, but just watch whole games, and they're just complete missed calls, and it definitely needs to improve and be better. But I will also say it's not just specific to Baylor. I don't think Baylor's getting the short end of the stick every single week or anything like that.
No, I don't either, and yeah, I think officiating across the board could stand to be better. I'm not one that gets bogged down with that. I kind of just take it as like it is what it is, and you've got to be better than that. And, if there's a game where you just get screwed over, then that's one thing. But, every single game, there's not a vendetta against you. I'm sorry. I know every fan base thinks that way, but they're not out to get you. And I just think it's more of that's just the average around the sport is just not very great officiating. So it's just part of the deal, and you hope that you get the right breaks at the right time and the right crew on the right night, but that's not always the case. And as we've seen in the Big 12 this year, and again, you can extend that out to most of college basketball, but there's a shortage of great refereeing. That's for sure. Doc Crow, let's see. What are Inoki Brechterfield's skins on the wall for guys he's recruited himself? He's been the coach of and helped develop some amazing talent, including Washington's natty contenders and Aaron Donald at Pitt. But who has he really recruited himself?
Yeah, so in 2019, that's the season I'm going to point to because he had been at Wisconsin for 4 years leading up to that year, and they posted a school record 51 sacks. Guys on that team, Isaiah Loudermilk, Garrett Rand, walk-on Matt Henningsen, and then freshman nose tackle Keanu Benton. So you put that kind of together, put that on the back burner as far as guys he recruited and then developed. You also had 2015 through 2017 where they had all these all Big Ten selections, Alec James, Connor Sheehy, Chikwe Obase. You put those guys together, and they went 45-10 during their career at Wisconsin. So really, really good. As far as lead recruiter, besides some of the guys I mentioned, Tyler Byads, who's the center for the Cowboys, he was the lead recruiter for him. Isaiah Loudermilk, who's on the Steelers. Andrew Van Ginkel, who's on the Dolphins. Keanu Benton, who's on the Steelers. Matt Henningsen's on the Broncos. Rhodus Johnson transferred to A&M this year. He'll probably be an NFL player. So all those guys, you put that all together, and you're looking at a very, very stout recruiting list. But then you look at guys who he developed, and I mean, you don't need to point any further than Aaron Donald. I mean, he didn't recruit him, but he developed him for 2 years, and Aaron Donald has mentioned him a lot. He's developed a whole lot of guys at various different stops, like you saw with the Washington team this year. But he's also done a nice job recruiting, even though I don't think that necessarily matters to me currently. I think it matters to me a whole lot more as how has he developed guys, because that's truly what Baylor needs going into next season and the year after.
Useless Kim Degree, how are y'all feeling as we near the start of spring ball? What should we do as fans to properly set expectations for the spring game? I don't want to enter the season expecting the world, but I don't want to be the most miserable, sour SOB on this message board either. I mean, as far as expectations for the spring game, I'd say don't have any because they're spring games, and typically they're going to look ugly, and even if they look great, that doesn't really mean anything for the following season. I mean, they can be an indicator of some sort, but they're not the end-all, be-all whatsoever. So just in general, like nothing specific for a mindset for the spring game, but just in general, I'm going to go in open-minded. I don't think this team's beating down the door of a Big 12 championship. I also don't think they're the worst team in the Big 12. They're somewhere in the middle, and that's where they're going to be for me. I'm a 6 wins guy, and then we can kind of go from there if they reach that point and then have room to grow next year, or if they're scraping to just try and reach that point, that will be a time to react accordingly. But I'm going in open-minded. I like some of the changes that they've made, but they've also made a lot of changes, and I don't know how good that is to keep doing year in and year out. I also don't know if that's just the new norm nowadays, and that's just how it's going to be most of the time. So there's a lot of questions. I think anybody acting, and I don't think anybody is, but anybody acting like they know for sure what this team's going to be, please, let me drink whatever you're drinking or have what you're having, because I think it's so hard to tell what is coming down the pipeline. And so, everybody celebrates the coaching hires and the new players and all that, but every school in America is doing the same thing. So are they having that great of an offseason, or is it just what everybody else is doing? That's the fun part that we're about to find out. So at least early on, I'm going to be, again, open-minded and just be excited about football and watching this team grow. And then once we start to get into the heat of the summer and start to get closer to the season, then it's time to start getting real about expectations. But I think that they should be improved. I think everybody should expect them to be improved. I think people should be excited about the new faces. I think people should be excited about the roster retention. But I also think everybody should be mindful of the fact that this is very much teetering on a very fine, delicate edge right now because of the way the last couple of seasons have gone. So, that's a lot of babble, but that's just kind of what my brain is reacting to when I think of next season expectations in spring ball right now.
Yeah, so for me, when I watch the spring game, it's about the vibe. What is the vibe of the program? Is everyone excited? Is this a situation where, they're coming out with a lot of energy? That's kind of what I want to see from a vibe standpoint. Expectations, I like watching individuals more so than taking apart, how did the defense look? How did the offense look? Because, again, it's a spring game. It doesn't really matter, honestly, but I want to see individuals stand out. That cares more to me. I'm not going to sit there and go, okay, now I know for sure this is a 5-win team, or now I know for sure this is a 10-win team. I don't think you get that from a spring game, but you just want to see moments where guys flash and kind of show, what they can be. That's more so what I'm looking for going into the spring game. So expectations-wise, I don't have many, and I don't think fans should have that many outside of them looking like a competent team that is having fun playing and coming out there with energy.
Yeah, that would be a nice first step, is to just be a positive football team by the end of it. Positive as in just your feel for it, the look of it, and the energy from it. And if they can break spring and feel like they've kind of got their bearings, that would be great. But there'll still be some questions to answer, I'm sure. But I think there's positive vibes for the most part. I think the best thing for this team, this program, will be to get the ball back out there and get off the offseason side of things for a little while, because it hasn't been long, but it's already been a very up and down roller coaster type couple months. And so I think rolling the footballs back out there here in a couple weeks will be a godsend, and we can start to get a good feel for, the energy surrounding this team. BU Bear and Ark said as well, kind of in regards to that, hope we have good chemistry, should be the rate determining step. So we should get some sense of that coming up with practices. So Watanejo Bear, first a PSA for those that have not seen the questions on the message board. Useless chem degree is chem as in chemistry, not Kim as in Mulkey, which I heard. I never understood the stance she was taking. Maybe it was just, what are we talking about here?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think just a message board name, and he's making sure that everyone knows it's CHEM instead of KIM.
Maybe it's the way I say it, or is it useless chem degree? Is that what I'm saying? I guess maybe, I don't know. On to a question I stole from another podcast. What would you change anywhere in college sports if you could go back up to 40 years with a magic wand? It could be a play call, a bad penalty, or something much larger. Mine would be for the NCAA to move toward allowing NIL with very tight guardrails when they lost the O'Bannon case.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Imagine, that's gotten us to this point, really, in my eyes. But I think conference realignment in general, the decision by, and I know I don't want to point to one program because it was a thing. It's been a thing in the past. But when those teams left the Big 12, I would like to see what that would have looked like had they never left. So I think that's kind of where I would look to. So A&M, Nebraska, Colorado, and Missouri.
Yeah, that would be a pretty stout conference right now if you had A&M, Missouri, Nebraska, not so much Colorado, but Texas and Oklahoma, the original Big 12. That would be quite something, but just didn't have the foresight, didn't have the wherewithal, didn't have the chemistry and the money and just a variety of different things, respect, so on and so forth, the cachet that an SEC had. It was a really solid base for the conference that's just fallen apart. So that would be very interesting to see what kind of level of respect and what kind of a TV contract that conference would be commanding right now.
And they'd be in a great spot with ACC schools if that was your league base. Much better than currently.
Yeah, I mean it's a crapshoot as far as what it all looks like moving forward. I see a lot of realignment discussion and what predictions are for the Big 12 and all that. They're in a better spot than they could have ever imagined post Oklahoma and Texas. They're not the SEC or the Big 10, but they're still in a very good spot in comparison to the dead Pac-12 or the potentially dead ACC. ACC still has bigger brands, so we'll wait and see on that. Everybody's already reading them last rights, and I don't think we're quite that close. But, that's a really good one. I don't really have one off the top of my head. Maybe what would have happened, and this isn't me personally, but what if Bryce Petty doesn't trip? What does that look like? And then in the long run, maybe it wouldn't have mattered because that time period still was going to change regardless, no matter how much you won. But that's a Baylor what if I always still wonder about from time to time. And there's others like – I don't want to bring up every heartbreak, but typically name a heartbreak if the result were to go the other way. I know it's not really a question like what would you change? You said NIL, and I'm thinking more of like if something changed. So I'm not even really on topic here. So to answer your question more specifically, I don't know. I really don't know. I'd have to give that some thought. Bears 224, but NIL is a good starting point. Like, hey, if you don't do this now, then it's going to be this in the next 10 years. I wonder if they would have gone ahead and been more proactive. And then again, I think a lot of the people involved would have been like, well, how much money are we going to make by delaying this? Oh, $20 million. Okay, let's still do this and drag this out and then hope for government intervention because it's all a money grab anyways. Bears 224. How do you compare the three new coaches we just hired compared to their predecessors? Better, worse, equivalent?
I actually think on the field, I think Mason Miller is going to be probably equivalent, if not better, than Coach Cap. I do think Cap probably has the advantage recruiting-wise. So I'll call it equivalent, I would say, would be where I would go with that. Jamar Chaney, Christian Robinson, I'm going to say equivalent. I don't see much of a difference. They're both really good recruiters, but still a lot to prove as far as, how great are they as coaches. So I'll say equivalent there. Brechterfield versus Dennis Johnson's really interesting. I think it's kind of similar to what I talked about with the first one. I think that Dennis Johnson's the better recruiter, but Brechterfield has a lot more experience, a lot more skins on the wall, and I just think technically, I like technique-wise and coaching-wise, I think he might be the better guy, and DJ's probably the better recruiter.
Fair enough. So there you go. There's a little breakdown to round out the mailbag. Bears 224. Hopefully that answers your question. And thank you for the question, along with everybody else for diving into the mailbag that contributed this week. And we always appreciate that and welcome that. So always be on the lookout each week for the thread that Grayson will start the day or so before where you can put all your mailbag questions and get those over to us. We do always love answering those. So that'll about do it here for this week's edition of the Bearcast. Anything before we go, Grayson?
No, just be sure to check out the premium side. Ashley has all kinds of content as well as Kindle on the basketball side as things get ready for March. We're about to turn that page, and then football-wise, just be ready for visits coming up soon, and of course camps, and then various things like that. Baseball with Levi, lots of news and information. So be sure to check out Sikkim 365 Premium.
Yep, a lot of talk too about just it's the off season, so you got a lot of talk about, like you mentioned, the ACC and the realignment thread that's been ongoing now for months and months and months. That's always, you can dive into that if you need a little, just like kill some time and read some interesting stuff. So realignment, basketball, baseball, softball, and then football spring practices and so on and so coaching hires. It's still remaining busy, even though it's technically the quote-unquote off-season. So, appreciate everybody for being a part of the show this week. Thanks to Garrett Ross behind the scenes. And for Grayson Grundhoefer, I'm Craig Smoak. If you haven't already, if you're watching us on Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page, please hit that like and subscribe button. And, I think that about does it for this week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday at 11 a.m. live on the Baylor Athletics on Sikkim 365 YouTube page. Until next time, I'm Craig Smoak. This has been the Bearcast.